Parshat Vayigash, toward the end of the Parsha, there's all this genealogy about the Israelites and the 12 tribes, the 12 sons, and then it sort of continues into next week's Parsha with Jacob's blessing of the 12 sons. So in some ways, like, the Parsha divisions are not like exact because there's like narratives that take place. So there's a narrative that begins in this week's Parsha of the 12 sons, and then it continues into the beginning of next week's Parsha with the blessing over those 12 sons. And so I want to look at that because there's something that's really interesting, which also relates to some of our learning previously about shepherds and farmers, but the focus of a number of the blessings is on agriculture. And I want to look at some of those blessings and explore, like, what's the Torah teaching us in terms of these blessings, because of all the things that we could be blessed for. Like, this is what the blessings are, and what's some of the deeper and ecological, spiritual messages going on here. So, does someone want to read the first source from Genesis 49, verses 1 to 2?
Jacob called for his sons and said, "Gather and listen, sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father."
Okay, good. So this is the end of Jacob's life, and in this week's Parsha, Jacob meets Pharaoh, and they have this like also like really like short interaction, and like the main thing the Torah describes is Pharaoh asks him how old are you, and he's like, I'm 137, and the days of my life have been like bitter and like bad. So it's like, and so here Jacob is like probably about to die, and so he asks his sons to gather around, and he's going to give them a blessing. Like he's like toward near death. I guess that's the context here. Do you want to read the next verse?
The tribe of Judah. Genesis. He, Judah, ties his he-donkey to a vine, and to the branch he ties his young she-donkey. He launders his garment in wine, and his robe in the blood of grapes.
Okay, good. So it's like interesting blessing. Like, this is the blessing, this is like part of the blessing that Jacob gives to Judah. That he ties his he-donkey to a vine, and to the branch he ties his she-donkey. He launders his garment in wine and his robe in the blood of grapes. Like, okay, like, well, what's the blessing? Like, what, like, usually, like, we would bless someone, like, I bless you with good health. I bless you with, like, tranquility. And yeah, there's it's like blessing about donkeys and vines. So let's look at Rashi, who's based on the Midrash, who's going to explain what part of what Jacob is blessing about. Do you want to read, Ariana?
He ties his he-donkey to a vine. He, Jacob, prophesies concerning the land of Judah, namely, that wine will flow like a fountain from it. One Judahite man will bind one he-donkey to a vine and load it from one vine, and from one vine branch he will load one young donkey.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here Rashi, based on the Midrash, is explaining that wine will flow like a fountain. So that Judah, whose land is going to be this area, because this is Hara Yehudah, this is going to be a area that is abundant in grapes. And it's so grape abundant that the wine will flow like a fountain. And so he explains that what's the connection to donkeys here? So that he'll like tie the donkey to the vine and load it from one vine. And from one vine branch he will load one young donkey. Meaning, so donkeys are to ancient times or pre-modern times what pickup trucks are to our times. And so what he's saying is that the vine is going to be so abundant with grapes that you take a donkey and it's just like you just like load it up. It's like there's like so many grapes on the vine of Judah. And that's not the case with the other tribes. If you plant grapevines in those lands, they're not having as much grapes. Okay, it's an agricultural characteristic of the land of Judah, in the land of Israel. Okay? Any questions or comments so far?
And that's true, yeah?
Yeah, it's true, and it's also interesting because Palestinian Muslims don't drink wine for the most part, since alcohol is forbidden in Islam, and yet in these hills, like there are Jewish farmers who grow grapes, and there are Palestinian farmers who grow grapes, because this is one of the most grape abundant regions of the land. It was only in like the past several decades that the Golan Heights became like the prime, like considered like the finest grape region because of the volcanic soil from Mount Hermon. But in ancient times, this was like a key grape area. Okay, and then the next Rashi says, all this is an expression of an abundance of wine. Similar to what Rashi said above. Okay, so that's tribe number 1, Judah. So let's look at the second tribe, Zebulun. Do you want to read?
Sure. Genesis 400. Zebulun will dwell on the coast of the seas. He will be at the harbor of the ships, and his boundary will be at Zidon.
Okay, good. So here, interesting, the blessing that Yaakov gives to Zebulun is that he's going to dwell on the coast. And what's today Sidon, which is in Lebanon. It's in southern Lebanon. Now, according to a midrash, Zebulun dwelling on the coast is a trader and also a fisher. That the tribe of Zebulun gets abundant fish and also gets other sea products like kilazon, which is a sea snail, which they make techelet, which they use for coloring tzitzit. Yeah. Today, you probably see some men wearing blue techelet on their tzitzit.
And women.
Okay, cool. I haven't seen very many women, but
My thoughts is
okay, awesome.
Yeah, it does, Bobby.
And so today there aren't very many techelet sea snails, these kilazon, off the coast, on the Mediterranean coast. It was likely overfished. And today the techelet comes from Croatia. And it takes about 80 sea snails to color one set of tzitzit threads.
Oh, never mind. It's not a good thing.
So it's also like an ecological choice
Yeah.
to use techelet.
And how do they get it here?
Like from Croatia, probably by ship. Because it's like they're paying a lot for techelet. Like,
Can't it just be dyed?
well, it can be, but there's a whole halachic conversation about what type of dye it needs to be, and there's actually a machloket among current rabbis about what is the proper dye for techelet. According to one rabbi, the Radziner Rebbe, it's from an octopus, ink, but that's rejected by most rabbis. And according to like the Patil Techelet company, they think they have like the scientific research that says that it's from the kilazon sea snail.
Wait, what's the color? Oh, blue, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Why did we do that? By the way.
Blue?
Yeah, why did we do this?
Yeah, so the Talmud in Masechet Menachot says that it's because when a person looks at tzitzit, they're supposed to see, it's supposed to remind them of the color of the sea, which reminds them of the color of the sky, which reminds them of the color of God's crown of glory, throne of glory. So it's like a spiritual, it's supposed to like connect a person spiritually looking at the tzitzit. Okay, so here we see that Zevulun is trading in dried fish and trading in this dye, and would likely trade with Judah, who had wine, like barrels of wine that they would bring on donkeys. There was actually a huge trade in dried fish for much of history. Actually, in like the past, I think I mentioned this before. In the past 500 years, the trade in cod fish, which is easily caught in the Atlantic, was like a lot of protein in Europe in like pre-modern times was cod, dried cod, that would be caught off the coast of North America and Greenland, and then shipped back to Europe. And so, too, in Israel, they would eat dried fish. In Roman times, they would even eat dried fish from Spain. It was caught in Spain, and fish sauce from Spain. Okay? Any comments or questions? Okay, so do you want to read number 3?
Yeah, the tribe of Issachar, Genesis 49, 14 to 15. Issachar is a bony donkey lying between the boundaries. He saw a resting place, that it was good, and the land, that it was pleasant. And he bent his shoulder to bear burdens, and he became an indentured laborer.
Yeah, so it's like a very cryptic blessing. It's like, I bless you, Yisachar.
Be a servant.
Yeah, it's like, what's going on? Like, what does this blessing mean? Can you read the next source?
So this is Rashi on the same chapter. He saw a resting place, that it was good. He saw that his territory was a blessed and good land for producing fruits.
Okay, good. So Rashi interprets it based on the Talmud that what it means that he saw a resting place, that it was good, it means it was good, a good land for fruits. Now, the tribe of Yisachar is near the Sea of Galilee, and that today is also a very fruit-abundant region. In our time, they're growing fruits there that they didn't used to grow, like tropical fruits like bananas that didn't exist in the land, and papaya, avocado. There's like a huge banana industry. If you walk near the Kinneret, there's like huge, and mangoes also. There's also in the summer you can volunteer or you can work to, like, they have this whole movement of young Israelis who are doing agricultural work, picking mangoes for like a month or two. Yeah. It's called Shomer Hatzair HaChadash. HaShomer HaChadash. Yeah. So here we see. So now this is the third tribe that has a blessing that relates in some way to agriculture or to food production. And so Yisachar would trade their fruits for Zebulun's dried fish, who would trade for Judah's wine. Okay? They didn't trade grape juice so much because that would rot. So they made it into wine because the fermentation enables it to be preserved. Okay, so now let's look at the tribe of Asher.
From Asher will come rich food, and he will yield regal delicacies.
Okay, so that's more explicit than any of the previous ones. What does Rashi say?
From Asher his bread is rich. Food which comes from the portion of Asher will be rich, for there will be many olives in his portion, and it draws forth oil like a spring. Similarly did Moshe bless him, and dip his feet in oil.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's another thing, that these blessings that Jacob gives are then, they're similar blessings that Moshe gives to the 12 tribes right before they're going to cross the Jordan River into Israel. And so there's a parallelism in the blessings, and they both focus on agriculture. So here we see that Asher has an abundance of olive oil. And so too today, if anyone if you've driven to Tzfat from here, then a lot of in the Galilee, you can see these huge valleys that are just full of olive trees. There's a lot of Israeli Arab agriculture that with olive trees and some Jewish Israeli agriculture. That's the olive oil abundant region in the land. Okay, olive tree. This is also a teaching about microclimates and how the land of Israel has a lot of different microclimates, and how certain fruit, certain olives or grapevines or different fruit trees like pomegranates or figs or dates, they grow well in different regions. For example, the Jordan Valley today is the main date producing region because dates grow well in the Jordan Valley. And so you have these like niches of where things grow well. Grain grows better on the coastal area. Okay, so here we have, through these 4 blessings, like a little agricultural picture of the agricultural economy in the land of Israel.
Thinking about the difference in
Sure.
when I try and describe what it feels like to be in Israel to people in America who've never been there, one of the things that I think that doesn't translate into American life is the notion of proximity, and how like usually when I'm describing to people in America, it's around like borders and how like literally close our neighbors are. And I try and describe it by saying like if I'm living in Philadelphia, then imagine like the Delaware River that separates New Jersey and Pennsylvania. On the other side, instead of New Jersey, it's Lebanon or like Syria. Like like that's what I'm usually describing. But also I'm feeling in this, from this Torah, this notion of proximity as it relates to microclimates and what's the word that you used? Micro ecosystems or something. I don't know. It's really powerful when you think of like the American Great Plains or something. It's like huge regions that just produce like wheat or soy or whatever. And in this tiny little land, we have these little baby microcosms that are producing really different kinds of produce in such a small geographic space. And that feels just like, it really feels like a metaphor for the complexity and diversity of this place, both physically and on every plane, like spiritually, emotionally, politically, in every way. And also it speaks to the notion that like we are really, like, if you just look at this small geographic land, there's like so much symbiosis and so much relying on each other and like relying on the balance of each of these micro communities, and like one can't sustain itself without the other. And there's like such a beautiful lesson there, I think, around like around sharing and relying on each other and not exploiting, and like that's all.
Yeah, so you're definitely onto something deep about this land. That it's not just the diversity of foods that are grown. There's also a huge diversity of species, and that's also because there are, as I said, many microclimates. So for example, in the Banyas area, that's like a water abundant, and then right below the Banyas is a marsh area, the Hula Valley, which was drained and then reflooded because it's this like incredible marsh ecosystem. And then there's the coastal plain, and there are river ecosystems, and there's deserts, and then even in the desert there's different types of desert. Like there's like semi-arid, and then there's like very arid, there's a variety of precipitation. In the far south, they get about 100 milliliters of water precipitation a year, whereas in the Golan, there's about 1,000 milliliters. So it's like 10 times as much. And then also you also can see it in Jerusalem, like because Jerusalem used to just be the old city, and then if you leave the old city and you go on like a 20-minute walk, you're like already on the edge of the desert. Yeah, and that's also like a sort of separate teaching about Jerusalem, and like why is it next to a desert, and like this, because like being spiritually connected. Okay. Any questions or comments so far?
Can you unpack that a little more?
About this teaching or about Jerusalem?
The desert in Jerusalem.
Yeah. So.
This is my housemate Noah.
Hello. So there's something special about being next to the desert. The desert is a place of humility, of where most of the life doesn't go out during the day, and most of the activity is during the night because the sun is so intense. And so a person who is in the desert, and we talked a little bit about this in relation to shepherds, that a person in the desert has to sort of walk humbly. And on the other spectrum is the river civilization, which has all this abundance, and that abundance can lead to arrogance, because they're living high off the hog, and so a city that is next to the desert, which also has very limited water resources. Jerusalem's had the Gihon spring, which was like a modest spring. And so, when Jerusalem was founded, it was a village. It was only in later times that they built aqueducts, especially the Romans, to bring water from the Hebron hills to Jerusalem. And now today, Jerusalem's water is, a lot of it is desalinated from the Mediterranean Sea. I just posted a video last night on desalination. That's another topic, but you can check it out. And I posted a video the day before about 7 shepherds from Marlet Sur. Hakem Lanu Roim Shiva, established for us, the 7 shepherds. Okay, so that's like in a nutshell about Jerusalem. And
Thank you.
yeah. Okay, so let's go to the so here just sort of to summarize about these 4 blessings. So one thing that speaks to me now is that this local agricultural economy that the Israelites had in biblical times is like that was amazing, and it would mean that there would be Michael Pollan talks about how the main way to have integrity in the food you eat is to be able to look the farmer in the eye, to know the farmer who made your food. And so in biblical times, it was and remember also the Jews would come to Jerusalem 3 times a year for the pilgrimage festivals. And so they would be they would be in their own tribe most of the time, but then they would interact with others and also the trading. And so they would know oh, this is Judah, this is the wine from the tribe of Judah. This is fruit from the tribe of Yisachar. This is dried fish from the tribe of Zebulun. This is olive oil from the tribe of Asher. There was a certain level of connection of when you have your olive oil, oh, the tribe of Asher made this olive oil, and we sort of know the tribe of Asher because we see them a few times a year, and that's one model, and today it's very different, because most people living in modern society have very little connection to who grows their food, to who transports their food, to who packages their food, even to who sells their food. There's even, I was in a store in New York City where I checked out by myself. Have you ever done that? It's you don't even, no one even sells you. It's just a machine. You just yeah, on the one hand it was oh wow, this is cool. It's no line, I just check out. But on the other, it's this move toward robots. And there's an article in last week's New York Times about how, because of all the issues with immigration in the U.S., so now farmers in the Central Valley of California are finding it difficult to hire seasonal farm labor from Central America and from Mexico. It used to be easier. And so now they have invested a lot of money in machines to do the work of processing, of harvesting the food and processing the food.
Harvesting?
Yeah, so, you probably know that they have combines that will harvest grain, these huge, $500,000 tractors that are giant, 20 times the width of this apartment.
Wow.
And they will both harvest the grain, and then they will thresh it. They will separate the chaff from the grain.
Wow.
Yeah, but now they are also making machines for not just for grain harvesting, but for lettuce harvesting, and then for lettuce processing to like wash the lettuce, to package the lettuce, and so part of what we're seeing in our times is that it's not just that we don't know the people who make our food, who grow our food, who transport our food. We're actually coming to a stage where it's not even people making our food, okay? And then it's like, you know, like a machine like plants the grain and processes it and harvests it and threshes it and packages it, and then a machine bakes it, and then like it brings it to a store, like on a truck, which is also a machine, which might be self-driving, and then at the store, like there's also like no people, and it's just a machine, and like where our whole food system has moved to machines. Sounds like sci-fi,
Don't
huh?
like this at all.
It sounds like Terminator.
There was this great like radio play a couple years ago that Planet Money did about like what happens when no one works anymore because everything is done by machines. But it's like about the guy who like does the upkeep of the machines and like obviously he's finding fulfillment through like his work. But then his daughter like gets her hands on or makes like a toy box, like a music box, and it's like not part of the machine regulated whatever. It's a good kind of thought provoking thing about what will happen when machines take over.
Yeah, so we're living through that process right now. Like we're seeing that take place in our lives. Like it's happening like more quickly than we might have expected. Even self-driving cars are like on the verge of like mass deployment, and it's a Jerusalem-based company, possibly the most profitable. It was bought last year by Intel, Mobileye, for $15 billion. They're one of the main developers of self-driving technology. And so it also just reflects the changes taking place in Jerusalem. Of like Jerusalem used to be this like very modest village with like one spring and no rivers on the edge of the desert, and now Jerusalem is a high-tech center and had the fastest growing tourism of any city in the world last year. Yeah, so okay, so that's like one aspect of the parsha that's like sort of under the surface. You need to like dig a little bit to like bring this out, but this is like in the parsha, like the blessings to the children, as I said, it's this week's parsha and next week's parsha. So if you go to the back of the sheet, then you'll see some other teaching. I will get you that. Do you have until 10 for this learning? Is that okay?
Yeah.
What's your?
What time is it?
10:30. There's so many feelings that we just talked about. Should he use
Here you go. Okay.
I got some wine.
So, who wants to read from Psalms 128?
When you eat the toil of your hands, you are fortunate and it is good for you.
Wow, that's a Jewish teaching. So let's unpack that a little bit based on the Talmud.
Oh, right. Reflecting on that beautiful line. Okay, this is in Tractate Menachot, which is on page 103b. Okay. Rabbi Hanin has said, "It is written, and your life shall hang in doubt before you." Deuteronomy. This refers to one who buys grain from year to year, and you shalt fear night and day. This refers to one who buys grain from week to week, and shall have no assurance of your life. This refers to one who has to rely upon the bread dealer. And I have to rely upon the bread dealer.
Okay, so in other words, Bibi here, he was having a difficult time making a living, and so he had to rely on the bread dealer. So so like in our times, we live in such food abundance that it's a little bit hard to get our minds around this. When Khrushchev, or maybe I think one of the Soviet premiers visited the U.S. and a U.S. president took him to a supermarket, I think in Minnesota, and the Soviet premier thought that the president was playing a trick on him because the supermarket was full of food, whereas in the Soviet Union that wasn't the case. And so the level of food abundance that we have in our times is unparalleled in history. This is some of what I talk about in the Machane Yehuda food tour, is because the Machane Yehuda market is the largest market in the land of Israel. There's about 250 stores, and there's over 1,000 types of food that you can get. And there's even like ethnic food from maybe 20 different country ethnic foods. There's like Mexican, Japanese, Ethiopian, Indian, Yemenite, Iraqi, Tunisian, Moroccan, French, English, Italian, Spanish, Greek, Turkish, Vietnamese, Thai. It's and you can get all of that fresh, that type of even King David and Queen Bathsheba didn't have this type of abundance. Okay. Montezuma, the king of the Aztecs, ate 8 types of foods.
And that was royalty.
Yeah, he was the king. Okay? Snake, rat, corn, bean, avocado, chili peppers, cacao from the Yucatan, and coffee from the Andes, because he was the king. That was the diet. Okay? And so this teaching of Rabbi Chanin is that he's talking about how there's a value on having your own grain and not having to buy it either from year to year or even from day to day or even worse from the bread dealer, but someone who grows their own food. What he's talking about is food security, is knowing that you have your store of grain and you don't have to worry about where you're going to get it tomorrow or next month. Okay? Another interesting aspect of food security is that in the past 5 years, Chinese companies have bought up most of the Israeli food companies, like Tenuva, Strauss. And so the whole food economy in Israel has changed. And one of the changes is also that now they're bringing in more Chinese products that are sold by the Israeli food companies, like Tenuva and Strauss. Yeah, so there's and also the Aden water company is now owned by a Swiss company. So the water companies also. Okay, so let's look at the next teaching from the Maharsha, who lived about 500 years ago in Poland.
And your life shall hang in doubt, etc. This refers to one who buys grain. This deserves to be among the curses stated in chapter 28 of Deuteronomy. Since when the Jewish people were on their land, every man had land, but from when they were exiled, they did not have land to plant.
Yeah, so there's something like Jewish families were connected to the land. That the vision of the Torah is that every Jewish family should have a plot of land. There would be subsistence farmers in the land of Israel. Now, that vision, over 3,000 years, was both fought against by the people that conquered the Jews and forced them off the land, the Babylonians, the Romans, and then when the Jews were living in exile, they were also forbidden from owning land in many cases. And now in our times where Jews don't even want to live on the land, it's like we're so exiled and so alienated from the land, and most people in modern times, and as I mentioned, we're also seeing the biggest migration of people from rural areas to cities, including the forced migration the Chinese are doing now. And but the Maharsha says that to be exiled from the land is a curse, whereas to be connected to the land is a blessing. And that relates to the blessing that Jacob gives of that he's blessing them that they're connected to the land. They have abundant land, and that's a blessing, to have land. Okay? So the next thing here I put is a falafel quiz. Do you know where the ingredients in your falafel come from? So where do you think the wheat comes from?
Egypt.
That's good. It comes from Kazakhstan. Actually, Egypt used to be a huge grain exporter to the Roman Empire. In our times, Egypt has a huge grain need. And in 2010, there was a very extreme heat wave in Russia, and that caused about a third of Russia's wheat crop to perish. When that happened, the Russian prime minister, not Putin, he's like, wow, climate change is real. And he said, we're now going to renege on we're going to cancel our grain contract with Egypt. Because Russia provided a good price for grain for Egypt, which has 80 million people, including 30 million in Cairo. And so Russia said, we're
30 million in Cairo?
Yeah, more or less, like maybe 25 million. It's not exactly clear. And so Russia canceled the grain contract because a third of their wheat crop was destroyed by this extreme weather event, extreme heat wave. And so that's an example of food insecurity, of where then Egypt had to buy grain at a higher price, and it subsidizes the price of pita for the masses of people. Okay, so the chickpeas in falafel come from Argentina. And the sesame seeds for tahina, Turkey. The vegetables and potatoes come from
California.
Israel. Yeah, so the redeeming Israeli part of our falafel is the tomato and cucumbers and potatoes, which come from Israel.
Wow, for one fall.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah, but let me just finish by saying the soybean oil comes from Brazil or the U.S., and the spices come from India or Indonesia. Okay, so it's and falafel itself is a Middle Eastern food.
Is it what food?
It's a Middle Eastern food. What's your question?
Okay. If what we learned on the front of this source sheet about the tribes each having like the one thing that they produce and like being in a symbiotic relationship with the other tribes where they each like provide their one thing to the others and they're each like mutually sustaining one another.
Mm-hmm.
If we're thank you.
Wow.
If we're to zoom out and apply that to a global world where in our falafel we are reliant on Kazakhstan and Argentina and Turkey and Israel in order to make a falafel, and everybody's providing their thing that they provide. What I can see how that could be like a beautiful macro application of the tribes. But on the other hand, when you have what you just described, where there's like huge famine or like the wheat crop gets knocked out, and the whole system gets thrown out of balance because of that. Like, I'm curious, like, what do we do with that? What would the Torah say? Like, how do we address the question of, like, both wanting to support each nation or tribe or whatever to do the thing that they're great at, and on the other hand, like, having our own backup safety plan by ourselves?
Yeah, it's an amazing question. I'd say a couple things. One is that, our economic system is based on neoliberal capitalism.
It goes back to neoliberal.
Okay, and part of that, and some of the best classes I took in college were on the world food economy and environmental economics. And so one of the ideas behind it is that you have economies of scale. So why is it that Israel gets most of its wheat from Kazakhstan and some from Ukraine and Russia and Kansas? Is because they have these huge plains and they can take these huge combines and tractors and produce wheat more cheaply than Israel does. And as a result, even though Israel produces some of its own wheat, which is a different type of wheat, it's called durum wheat as opposed to common wheat. So Israel actually exports the wheat that it grows, most of it, to Italy, where Italy will then make it into pastas and sell those pastas to Trader Joe's, which will sell them in California. Okay?
Okay.
And so it's about price, and it's about profit. Now, I have two main issues with this. I have three main issues with this current system. The first issue is the carbon externality, which is that the price of our food doesn't reflect the external price which we're putting on other species and next generation and later in our lives, actually. It's not just, like, we're going to also experience it. That's issue one. Issue two is an issue of food security, which we talked about. And issue two is an issue of connection. That when I grow my own food, or at least when I know the farmer who does, or at least know of the farmer, like, oh, this comes from Maggie's farm outside of Jerusalem, then there's like a level of kavanah in eating food that is greater when I'm connected to the food. That's like farmers markets, that's community-supported agriculture, that's like having like a little like mirpeset that like you have like your porch, you like grow, like even like grow like one tomato plant. But just to see like, oh, like it's so much work to grow like one tomato. Like, oh, okay, now I relate to food differently. Okay, so then the last couple of things on the sheet are just a few statistics that Michael Pollan says 10 calories of fossil fuel energy go into producing every 1 calorie of food energy. And about 40% of that's from transporting the food. And also about 1% of total agricultural production in Israel is organic, of which over 80% is exported for sale abroad.
Of the organic?
Yeah.
Where?
So to Europe and the United States primarily. Because Israel produces, you see, because especially in the south of Israel, they have these greenhouses that can produce year-round produce, which Europe and North America demand, and sell it for a high price, and so like the grade A produce is for export.
What kind of produce?
All sorts of things: melons, peppers, strawberries. Yeah.
Where is like the food that we buy at the supermarket here? Like where is that coming from? The shuck.
Well, so most of the fruits and vegetables that we eat here, the fresh fruits and vegetables, come from Israel. A small percentage comes from Jordan, and certain things that are not in season, like apples, because Israel doesn't produce year-round apples, come from abroad. There's also a huge refrigeration system to enable us to eat food months after it's been harvested. But most of the grain we eat comes from abroad, and the like soybean oil and dried fruits and nuts comes from like California.
And like the tomatoes and cucumbers that I'm buying in the shuk are not organic.
Correct.
Because they're covered in pesticides.
They're sprayed in pesticides. I'm sure they're covered in them, but
Also, you mentioned they're made with treated water, and so there's like some pharmaceuticals that are found in them. Particularly, you mentioned blood thinners.
yeah, just like trace amounts. But that's also true of the organic produce.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because the organic produce uses the same water.
Yeah, can't escape it.
Uh-huh.
how do you, maybe it's not for right now, but I would love a tutorial on how to live,
Maggie's Farm.
yeah, like how to shop in the shuk or in the supermarket with an eye toward organic produce or whatever.
Yeah, so they're in the shuk. The Tavenet sells organic produce. They're located on Agrippa Street and Hadassah Health Food Store, which is right near the train station on Yafo Street, the Machne Yehuda train station. Those are the two places that sell organic produce.
And where is it grown, the organic produce?
It's grown in Israel. Different. I'm not sure.
Is it safe or fair to assume that even not organic produce grown here carries less gross chemical stuff than like mass-produced stuff in the U.S. just because it's happening on a smaller scale here? Or is that unfair to assume?
It's just this.
I'm just freaking out over here.
I'm not sure. I mean, I know that in the U.S. there's a common practice of using Roundup Ready, which is glyphosate, to at harvest to increase the yields.
We wrote about this a lot. It's really scary.
And I don't know whether, I doubt that they do the same thing in like Kazakhstan and Ukraine, just because the agriculture there is like less industrialized.
Right.
It's like a heavy duty pesticide type thing that like crops then kind of become immune to. And so they have to keep like upping and upping the dose, yeah.
Whoa.
Very scary.
I don't like that at all.
Yeah, so
Someone told me that most of the organic produce grown in Israel is grown in settlement farms.
I mean, look, organic produce in Israel is like small. It's like below 2%. So the number of there's Maggie's Farm outside of Jerusalem, which is not a settlement. There's Ben's Farm, which is not a settlement. There's like produce in Khalil, which is in the northern Galilee. There's Nautz Madar, which is in the Keturah. Like the number of like organic farms in Israel, there's probably like 20 organic farms. I mean, yeah, and there's like very little research about like organic produce in Israel because it's such a tiny market.
Right.
Yeah. So I sort of leave you with these two questions at the bottom. Why does it matter if I eat globalized food? And how can I become more connected to the food I eat? So,
I don't know.
yeah, so like it takes an effort. I would say, like, I would encourage Dorot to do a food tour. Like to have one of its seminars be like a food seminar. Like connecting to the food. Like where does our food come from? That would be interesting. Like look at Israel from the lens of the food.
I'm freaking out. What am I supposed I don't know. Never mind.
But yeah, I think that like what my wife and I do is we mostly order from Maggie's Farm.
What is Maggie's Farm?
Who's Maggie?
Yeah.
Maggie is a woman farmer. There's also supporting women farmers. Okay?
Is it like a CSA that you get or what?
No, they do have a sort of CSA, but
Okay.
as you know with CSAs, then you just take what you get.
Right.
But yeah, she's outside of Jerusalem,
There's drop off.
and she delivers. It's more expensive, to eat organic from a local farm.
But you're saving on medical bills on the other end.
Yeah, and maybe you'll be more
Question.
You might also be more mindful of how you use your food and not wasting the food. If you like, oh wow, this is like high quality food.
Is it beautiful? Is the produce gorgeous? It's just so beautiful.
That one pomegranate was a little questionable.
Some of it is, but some of it is like, like sort of like non-commercial, like it's like not like, like they throw out a lot of produce in a supermarket. It's only like these like
Yeah.
nice apples.
there's this company in DC that like goes around collecting the produce that people throw out because it's not pretty,
Mhm.
but like it's totally like edible and delicious. It just doesn't look very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Brooklyn is a company that makes juice out of it.
That's
Fruit like
Cool. Yeah, one of the first things that my wife and I did after we got married is we went cherry picking here in Israel, and like as you're starting to see with the way like my orientation sort of thing, so I was like picking the cherries that were like a little bit like that no one else would pick because like a bird had like pecked at them,
And you're like, it's fine.
and she's like, "Why are you picking all of these like bad cherries?" I'm like, "Well, they're gonna go to waste otherwise, but I'll eat them."
So sweet.
The ugly duckling.
So.
Thank you on behalf of the earth here.
Racial foods for the earth.
Yeah. Tov, so that's some food for thought.
Thank you.
Which, is both like hopefully it can be a little bit uplifting because like my uplifting thought that I'll leave you with
Please.
is that like this is in the Torah. Like Jacob's blessing and Moses' blessing is that the tribes will have agricultural abundance in the land of Israel and they're going to have like a level of connection to their food. And like that's the Torah. Okay? Like that's the written Torah and that's the oral Torah. And then that's the later commentators who say like be connected to your food. So this isn't like some like hippie thing of like tree huggers. This isn't like some like liberal value, which it also is, but like this is like ancient Jewish teaching that, like if someone wants to argue, then like argue with the Maharsha. Okay?
Take it up with the Mars. Yeah, I kind of want to know the Hebrew for this. When you eat the toil of your hands, you are fortunate and it's good for you.
So I could share with you a Hebrew-English source sheet. I just didn't print it because I didn't want to print the extra pages.
Yeah. I
But
think it'll be a good tagline for my farm.
yeah, so I can share that with you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Because
You're
one
welcome.
final teaching that relates to this issue of brotherly love that comes out in the Parsha and this week and also next week's Parsha is, which is just coming to me now, like as we're talking about it, that like how is brotherly and sisterly love expressed in the land of Israel? Like what's Jacob's blessing is like, like grow your, like you're going to have these like great, agricultural abundance. And then the implication is they're going to trade it with each other.
Right.
And it's like, oh, like, if like
We
you
need
come,
each other.
like we need each other. We're interdependent. We need each other's food, and we like partake of that, and we appreciate it, and like that's like the like brotherly and sisterly love is like through our food. We connect to each other through our food.
And also we need each other, and also
We need.
we need each other, and
Uh-huh.
also we need to do our own thing. Like we each have to, like we can differentiate.
Right, which is also like
Feels pertinent.
that's also like an ecological idea that as an alternative to globalized food is local agricultural economies and regional agricultural economies to replace globalized ones. It's not saying like, because like globalization has been going on for thousands of years, it's not saying that like we need to like stop all trade, but it's a question of how do we reorient our trade so that it's more, earth conscious, and we're like still trading like regionally, but we're not getting things from like the other side of the world that we could get here, or that we could at least eat something that's here instead of getting it from somewhere else. So